Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Shed Art Customs TV. And in this episode, we're going to be playing with the oil tank for the KTT Velocette. I'm going to probably describe a little bit further on what we're doing, but effectively, the oil tank has had the powder coat removed and it's revealed some holes which I sort of knew were there, which need repairing or filling up. I haven't decided yet whether I'm going to solder them or weld them. There's the return pipe, which had become unsoldered as part of the powder coating process. So it actually melted the solder and it had come half out, so that needs to be put back in. And then my good friend Alan has made me some adapters for a KTT oil fitting, and we're going to remove the original oil fitting out of the tank, and then we're going to solder in a new one. I'd just like to take this opportunity to talk to you about subscribing to the channel. So one of the things you can get as a sort of creator is the analytics behind the videos. And what's become apparent is that 90% of the people watching the videos aren't subscribed. So I'd really like to encourage you to think about subscribing. It's really going to help out. And once we've reached the magic, or I've reached the magic number of 1,000 subscribers, then I understand that YouTube puts some different analytics into the channel and it gets pushed out to further places which will help it grow. So I'm really keen to encourage you to subscribe. It's totally free. There's no downside to it other than you get reminded about when my videos are coming out, which hopefully if you're watching the channel you're interested in anyway. So anyway, I'll stop waffling and let's get on with the oil tank. So here we've got the 1932-ish KTT Velo oil tank. Now unfortunately this has been powder coated in a previous life, and I don't know if you can see, I'll focus in on that. That's the oil return pipe and it's become almost unsoldered from the tank. So I think what's happened is part of the powder coating process, it goes into an oven to bake the powder coating on, and it's melted the solder and the solder's actually come away. So we've also got some holes which I can blow through, so it's not going to be very oil tight, where the join, I think the construction of the tank, this is actually a join line and it's been soldered together again. So all in all, there again you can see like a drip of solder that's coming out the bottom. Luckily the neck seems okay. So the plan is I'm going to take this back to a local powder coaters that I know. I've had quite a few things done to them with them, and they've got a sort of acid solution that they use when you're taking powder coating off wheels. Now I'm wondering if they might be able to use that. I can't use any heat on this to get it off, and I certainly don't want to be sitting there with an angle grinder with a wire brush on the end of it to clean it up, because I really need to get it clean on those soldered joints. So I'm going to try and get it back to bare metal, and then I'll show you how I'm going to go about repairing it. Okay, see you in a bit. So this is the KTT Velo oil tank, and it's now been through the blasting process and got rid of all the paint. It's got a few problems which I knew about, so one of them being that is actually a hole right the way through, so I can't understand how anyone was powder coating that with a hole in it. There's a couple of other marks, but I can't poke anything through those. And then basically, this is the oil return pipe, and that had become unsoldered from this portion here, so I've actually removed that. So when it's put back in again, it's got some solder on the end, and that basically fits into the end of that pipe. I don't know if you can see the little witness parts of that solder there. That gets glued into the neck. So that's one part of the puzzle. So that's got to get glued back in, and that's got to get glued back to the tank. That hole needs filling up.
I need to put some paraffin or some white spirit inside it and find out if there's any other leaks. I can see that one. There's a couple other things that are slightly suspect. This frame, if you want, a supporting structure around the outside, you've obviously got a thread which is blind. They look like they're soldered in from the inside when I've shone the torch up the hole. But this bit around the outside doesn't look like it's got any solder around it, so I'm thinking about putting some solder around, just making sure that's secure. And then the last part of the puzzle is this oil fitting. So, good friend of mine, Alan, if you're watching the channel, thanks very much for this. So I presented Alan with this original KTT oil fitting, and oh, can't get that off with one hand. This should have a filter on the end of it, and if you can see the remnants of that filter. This thread is it's a cycle thread, so it's 20 TPI, but for whatever reason it's an unusual size, so it's not a size you can buy a tap for or a die for. So I sent it to Alan with the idea that he might be able to find a tap. At that stage we thought we could get around it, but no. So he's thread cut this piece of brass for me, and that's going to get soldered in the tank. So at the moment it's got that fitting in there, which I haven't got a thread for anyway, so I didn't have an oil fitting, so this is what's going to get replaced. So that's going to get unsoldered, and then that ring is going to get put in there. And then at the front he's made me an adapter, so let me undo that and I'll come back. Okay, we're back. So again, unusual thread, cycle thread, but not quite right, and it's got a taper on the end of it, so it makes an oil seal. And Alan managed to find this nut which he's recut the thread on, and he made me this he's made me this sleeve which has also got the taper on it, so those two will go together and make the seal. And then ultimately I can put a piece of copper pipe and sweat a piece of copper pipe up the inside of that hole and make that an oil sight fitting. So Alan, if you're watching this, you're an absolute star, mate. My lathe definitely wouldn't cope with the thread cutting duties on that, so very, very pleased and very, very thankful for that. So I'll bring you back once we're back in the garage, and we'll get the welder out, we'll get the burner out, and we'll start unsoldering things and see if we can do some repairs to this thing. And then we've got to wash it out. So I'm very conscious that this thing has been sandblasted or aqua blasted. Well, sandblasted, I don't think it's aqua blasted, it'll already be going rusty, but I'm very conscious that I can't afford to let this thing get rusty. And what I'd really like to do is use some soapy water and wash all the inside out. So somehow I'm going to have to wash the inside out to make sure there's no grit and gravel. So all the time, once all these have been desoldered, I'll have a bit more space and I can get in there with a toothbrush or whatever. I've shone a torch inside it, and it looks pretty good inside. It's not all crusty and horrible, but obviously being an oil tank, we definitely don't want any gravel or grit or anything else to go into the oil system. So anyway, that's the next challenge, and I'll bring you back once we're in the garage. Wowza. So I've just sweated that bracket back on, used some flux and just warmed it up gently and just ran some solder around, so I'll clean that off and hopefully that's going to look really nice, back to secure. I don't think it was ever going to fall off, but it just didn't look that great, so yeah. So I've done the paraffin test and that's definitely a hole, and so is that. So I'm going to seal those two up. I've decided I'm going to give it a quick go with the welder. Might regret that, but it just feels like the right thing to do. Once I've sealed those, I'll try it again and see if I can find any more. And the other thing I've done is I've just resealed that, cleaned all the flux off it, so it's nice and secure now. Alright, I've taken an executive decision and welded. There's a couple, and ultimately I looked at a couple of other things which didn't look quite right, so in the end I'll just dab them with the welder. So I'll just clean that up with the angle grinder and I'll bring you back. So I've just soldered up the fitting, literally wound a piece of solder around it with some flux. I've just fluxed up the tank, and I'll drop one into the other and we'll warm it up and we'll see how we get on. Well, it looks like it's wetted out really lovely, so then I'll let that cool off naturally, wipe the flux off, and then we'll have a go at sticking the return pipe in. So I've had to be a bit, what's the word, tactical, that would be a good word. The tube that goes up inside, I don't know if you're going to be able to see that. Can you see that? There's a tube coming up and I've soldered it to the inside of the neck as per how it was before, so it's supported. And to do that, I've used a pair of mole grips to hold it clamped. I've soldered the neck already, I soldered the tube already. I put some flux in there and then I've just fed some solder in. So I'll just let it cool off and then I'll take the clamp off and then I'll let you have a better look. So hopefully you can see that. Anyway, the bright bit of solder is actually holding the return tube into the neck. Looks nice and secure. I'm going to clean up and I'll come back. So I've made up a filter which I'm going to solder in. Now I've made a cap. I've made it differently than I've done before. So if you want to see how I make one of these things, go back and check one of my other videos on how I made the rudge tank. But I've made a cap this time, so the burner is probably too hot. It doesn't really, not sure about the burner. So I'm going to try and solder this bit round the top, and then I'm going to warm this up with the blowtorch, and I'm just going to sweat that in to the bottom of the fitting. Well, that's the plan anyway. So I'll have a go at that off camera, and then yeah, we'll see what you think. And there it was soldered. well, the brass bit soldered yet. I've not soldered it into the fitting, but yeah, definitely soldering iron's the way to go. I've only got quite a small soldering iron, so it's not ideal, but that's glued that together in such a way it's never going to come apart. I'm going to go see if I can make that look a little bit neater, but very pleased with that. Look, when I made the Triumph one, or the Rudge one, was it Triumph? Yeah, maybe Triumph. You could buy one, but I'm betting you can't buy a Velocette KTT oil filter. So very pleased. So I'll put some etch prime on. So I think that's going to be it for the oil tank for the moment. I'll bring you back when we're going to paint it in surprise, surprise, gloss black. And hopefully that etch prime is going to stop anything going rusty until we get there.